Hi, my name's Clare Murray. I am Managing Partner of Specialist Employment and Partnership Law Firm CM Murray, and I am also the host of the podcast series Law Firm Founder Conversations, a series which I feel very personally engaged in. I love it. I find it so inspiring and insightful, and it's like a little bit of therapy for me, but it's also a fabulous way for me to speak to some of my friends who've also founded law firms about the highs and the lows, sharing some practical tips on setting up and growing a law firm, and kind of sharing some war stories, and hopefully along the way inspiring people who are sitting at their desk maybe in big law going, you know what, I'd really love to have my own place. I'd love to have my own business. So this is for you as well. It's meant to give you some insights and hopefully inspire you and help you along the way. And I am absolutely joyously delighted to have today with me Alex McPherson, who is founder and partner of Ignition Law. Ignition Law is described as a law firm for startups, scale-ups, and for the entrepreneurially spirited. And I have to say, Alex and his firm, I've sort of seen them from afar for a long time, and admired them from afar. We've had sort of mutual friends and clients. I think actually I even lost out to you when I was hiring someone or looking to hire someone. So it's been wonderful to be able to see you up close and find out much more from the inside about your firm. You've got an annoyingly long list of awards. You've won so many things. You've won things like the Law Firm Culture and Diversity and Inclusion Awards, the Federation of Small Businesses Awards, the High Growth Business of the Year. You're finalist in so many things. You're winner of the Modern Law Awards 2019 Business Growth. But also, this is a momentous moment, Alex, because, and welcome, you've just won another award.
Thank you, Claire.
Tell us, what have you won now?
Well, I think it's the team really, but Managing Partner of the Year at the Modern Law Awards, which meant an awful lot to us as a firm, because it sort of vindicated a lot of things that we've been doing as a team.
And that is, I mean, it is a really important thing. I mean, let's acknowledge the fact that it is the Managing Partner Award, so it is about you. It is to you, but actually it is built on the work and support of an entire team. So that's fabulous for you and your firm, and I'm really happy for you.
Thank you, Claire. I'm really flattered to be included in your podcast.
Oh, my pleasure. Delighted. So we're going to jump straight in. Tell me, what attributes do you think it's important for a law firm founder to have? Someone sitting at their desk now considering, could this be me? Could I do it? What help can you give them in terms of what you think they're going to need in terms of personality and skills?
Good question. I mean, I think the first thing is you do need some experience. So there is, even if one has got an instinct to set up a firm or to set up a business of any kind, I think it's worth a degree of conservatism in terms of making sure you're comfortable that you've got enough experience, and when you feel comfortable that you have, it's the right time in your life in terms of, you know, wider risk factors. If you're taking out a mortgage, settling down with a family, you have to be quite sure it's the right time for you. And I think the first thing, dry but important, is to build some sort of a plan. And I think the attributes that would sit behind that would be things like a real sense of drive and ambition, and realism that the first year or two is going to be tough. It's going to cost more than you perhaps think. It might well be that you earn less than you perhaps would like, and are absorbing a huge amount of risk, personal guarantees, those sorts of things. I think talk to attributes of an appetite for risk, as I say, a degree of experience, some capital, you know, whatever form, so that you've got that covered off. And I think once you've got those attributes clear in your own mind that it's definitely what you want to do and the timing's right, probably the first step as you start to build out that plan, it is an awful lot of listening and asking questions of clients, colleagues, mentors, you know, particularly mentors. And that should really culminate in a real sense of gut instinct and belief that your vision and your plan is unique, it's going to work. There'll be invariably changes from doing that listening piece. But I think getting that getting that in place before you jump talks to an attribute of risk management, if you like, before you actually make that first step. I don't think it's wise to jump in and plan on the way down with something such as a law firm, as it perhaps is with technology businesses sometimes. So I think those are the key sort of attributes and first steps that one should sort of think through if you are thinking about making that move.
What about, and can I just say, apologies for if you heard any barking in the background, that's our dog Flash. I attribute that name entirely to the kids. But anyway, apologies for any barking if I heard in the background. But what about energy? I mean, how much sort of energy and motivation do you think you need to sort of to get this baby off the ground and then to kind of keep it going and growing?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I mean, I think energy is essential, and that talks to a good point. Does one have a little break, recharge the batteries before you jump in at the deep end? But energy is essential, and then energy varies over time. I think that first stage, I think this is a really good question. I think the first stage is about adrenaline and survival and coffee and planning your day in the sense of, right, I'm going to go and do BD in the morning, breakfast and lunch. I'm going to try and get some work done around that. I'm going to try and do ops in the evening, get the website sorted until silly o'clock. I think that first stage is one of survival, no matter how good the plan is, and that talks to having an awful lot of energy reserves. We started January the 1st, 2015, and the energy I had there was totally different to the energy now. I still got a huge amount of passion and love every single day, working incredibly hard. But that energy, there's a great book that I love called Be More Pirate, which talks to this swashbuckling pirate phase where it's, sometimes borderline good enough legal, and you're really teetering on the edge with that sort of an energy. But as you grow, that's not necessarily sustainable. Or indeed healthy, mentally or physically, and you kind of move into, if you like, more of a Navy metaphor where things are a little bit more structured and you're a bit more ordered, but you try desperately not to lose your soul and your culture. So I think the first energy phase is one of, sleep, get ready for it, and then in at the deep end with a ton of adrenaline, and probably that will culminate in a almost a breaking point moment, which I certainly had after about a year or so. We, as I say, start of Jan 2015, got to November, and then was physically and mentally at a breaking point. And that was a point where coaching and a bit of a pivot in terms of what was sustainable, what I wanted in a more sustainable way in terms of energy, that came about. So starting to think more about listening and making better use of working in a team than trying to do everything on an individual basis. So I think there's almost like a startup phase energy, and then there's a more sustainable scale-up phase of energy.
Yeah, and I know that one area where I sort of failed, of many failures, but which hopefully I learn from as I go along, but one of the failures was not to build infrastructure early enough. And not to, and it sounds to me like you did actually build, it took us really a decade at least to sort of build a robust and resilient broad base of infrastructure. So I think, I kept operating at that very high intensity energy level for much longer than I needed to or should have. And it sounds like you learned that lesson much more quickly than I did.
Well, that's really interesting. I still think I failed on that in many respects and pushed myself into a place where I wasn't a brilliant person. So my mother-in-law passed away midway through the year. I remember working right the way up until the hearses arrived at our house and losing all sense of perception, reality, and the crude reality was I was so far in the business, had to take off, and that family, of course, always comes first. But in many day-to-day senses, you're compromising up to the eyeballs to the point that it's not sensible, and you're losing your sense of what should be important. We were lucky because we joint ventured with Gunnar Cook when they were at an earlier stage. Sarah Goulbourne remains a really close friend and mentor to this day, and we joint ventured on a fixed term basis where we handed over a chunk of revenue, and they treated us, if you like, as a Gunnar Cook partner that owned its own brand and IP. So that was quite important. Well, it was a big commitment in terms of cash flow. It was important because from day one we had sterling, euro, dollar client accounts. A lot of stuff was done properly behind the scenes, but nonetheless we got to that breaking point.
But what an amazing resource, and what an amazing way of, obviously you have to pay for it, but to get quickly the infrastructure that you need to actually to free you up to do the stuff that you love, and the reason why you set it up in the first place. I think there can be so much going on in founding and then growing a firm that's really important stuff, but actually can take you away from the stuff that you as a person find joyful and inspiring and motivating, and it can get a bit much. So I love that you at a very early stage learn quickly. I'm sorry it was in those circumstances with your mother-in-law passing away. But what a lesson, and it's obviously stood you in good stead. So tell me about your fabulous firm. Tell me about the size and the growth journey so far, and I guess where you sit in the market and what differentiates you.
So there's about 70 of us in total now. We're growing this year. We're growing about 40% on a turnover basis is our stretch target. We have a majority female senior leadership team, which we're extremely proud of. I'm a dad of two daughters, 6 and 8, and I think it's a hugely important part of our culture and law generally to increase diversity, and bringing more diversity into law. We do that in a small way with our work experience program, but that's a longer term issue. That goes right the way back to students at law school and university. And one of the things we can make a very, very immediate impact on is that these extraordinary women that are in the profession and that have got so much they want to contribute. The cliche being mums and dads as well, by the way, that they kind of leave law and want to come back and have lost confidence, and that's a big part of our culture, is having a concept of agile partners, so there's not a glass ceiling. Culturally, people are running their own P&Ls and teams in a very supportive and transparent way. There's no hierarchy in terms of a full-time partner or an agile partner working the way they want to work, and so that's been a huge part of our approach and pushing the gender diversity to where it should be, and that's been fantastic. I think our structure is much more probably not quite flat, but a much more meritocratic structure of support and kindness, and I think that lends itself very well to working with startup scale-ups and entrepreneurs, because they very much expect that they work in a very human way, that they would it would be quite normal that you'd have children at home and be a parent as well as a lawyer, and the bottom line is what's the technical advice? Is it commercial? Is it cost effective and responsive? So it's a really nice area of law to work in, because you're working much smaller teams, you're having much more impact with a client, and so it's extraordinarily rewarding in that sense. The culture is a kind of mix of a very progressive, agile, dispersed law firm in that physical respect, but the actual backbone of the firm is really traditional in the sense of a really good kind of bank of our own intranet and know-how, to professional support lawyers that are helping build that out properly, with the whole firm contributing to traditional drafting notes and the documentation and know-how, off-site ski trips, an awful lot family-friendly socials and events, office in central London. So a lot of the stuff that you would have expected to have seen in a law firm 20, 30 years ago is still very much our backbone, but then a use of technology to allow for things. So we've got our own law tech that helps with 360 conversations, structure really strong model along 6 aspirational values that spell the word scaled, which underpin our culture, and all of which are aspirational. So there's a couple I'm not so good at, but there's these elements that really, I think, define us as a firm.
And is this technology that you developed yourselves, or that you've sort of licensed from a vendor, or because I do think that technology and the role of technology it's a really big issue for law firms generally, but particularly for first generation firms like ours. And it's like, well, what's affordable, what's doable? We've got a mutual friend where I think you're actually a NED, where they've actually, it's not a law firm, but it's another professional services, where they've actually wrapped the professional services around the tech, and which is kind of turning things on its head. but what are your views on the importance of technology in a founder-led firm?
So I think it's essential. Someone joined recently, and she was very clear with the firm she'd left that she wants to be a lawyer and she wants to do drafting and doesn't want to join a technology business that does law. And I thought that was quite an interesting observation. And I think there's an awful lot of law technology out there that's almost looking for the solution. And so we license in an awful lot of different technologies, but our commercial modus operandi is to not have a race to the bottom on cost. So we're very cost effective rather than trying to be using technology to drive down our costs to the point that it's a pure cost sell, because I don't think that's as sustainable long term. But then equally, there's a lot of technology that we've built out ourselves with a good friend, Will Jukes from university, who helps, and so part of that is for our cultural piece, so to enable 360 conversations in a very kind of transparent and an open way to take
so tell us, what does that look like, that this thing that you've developed?
Yeah, so we've got these six values that spell the word scaled, and then there's two that are non-negotiable that spell the word it, to spell scaled it. The I in the T are integrity and transparency. So if those falter, whether it's an interview or whether it's generally, then that wouldn't be a sustainable relationship for us, and that's very much what we'd hope clients would expect from us as well, integrity and transparency. The others talk to 6 behaviors: 2 client-facing, sourcing, cultivating; 2 colleague-facing, assisting and leading; and 2 that are community-facing, evangelizing and delivering. And so our technology talks to these 6 behaviors and allows people to kind of chart their own career and to say, look, I'm going to do more sourcing, but finding business, or I'm going to do more cultivating, running, doing a great job of leading a team and delivering on business. So the tech that we built out, it talks in a very, very clear way as to what one's doing, how one's getting on, how one's running the P&L within the team. And that's one of the most important internal delivery pieces. It's on a platform, ignition.careers internally.
Oh, right. And is that, so how often is that conversation? Is it like a daily thing, a daily update with daily feedback with like smiley faces, or, do you know what I mean? Like emoji responses, or is it
we tried it on a where you could give weekly feedback, and we sort of over-engineered some of it. We tried it on a quarterly conversation basis where there was a quick check-in every quarter, and now we do it more on a biannual basis, but really a big kind of end of year chat and kind of work through in a very mutual way. And I think the idea is to build that out so that there's constructive feedback both ways, and I think that's something I genuinely relish. It's later this afternoon, I've got a Myers-Briggs assessment to kind of, it's never ending, the kind of personal development piece, which I think's it'd be really interesting what on earth they say, but that's a big part of us, especially when you're working in a more dispersed way, to kind of have technology like that that's really integral to your culture. I mean, we're doing stuff like which isn't particularly innovative just to us, but things such as where we're doing a shareholders agreement, being able to send clients a link to a questionnaire where they can pre-populate certain elements. So in terms of a fee quote, it's more of a case of saying, you quite right, you want this on a very cost-effective basis. The quid pro quo is of these, an awful lot of questions going to a shareholders agreement. If you can complete most of them, we can have a really efficient discussion about the areas where you've got questions or want to negotiate. So that's the latest piece of tech we're building out that would pre-populate a really sensible precedent, but then you've still got the old-fashioned lawyer that's going through thinking about it strategically, for board control, drag tag, whatever it might be. So it's those areas that we're using our own proprietary technology, and then a lot of it is just sort of licensed, probably like CM Murray, I'm sure, to just drive efficiency for clients, smooth onboarding, transparency of fees, those sorts of things.
And in terms of, are there any particular, because I'm in constant discussions with other firms about their experience of whether it's time recording software, financial management software, CRM, trying to get recommendations as to what people think are the best, but also affordable for, a more, a first gen firm that may not have the quite the same huge financing resources as some of the huge firms. I mean, are there any particular way you think that that's a fabulous bit of software that we license and that you'd recommend?
Yeah, so, and I think that's a really good point, for your audience, that the reality is that year one, it's not going to be perfect. Year one is going to be making do, until there's enough of an economy of scale to get going. But one piece of tech that we've used for years in licensing is our practice management system, Action Step, which we've got a lovely relationship with them. It's one of many. We absolutely love it. It's a great progressive practice management system. They're still a scale up themselves. I met the CEO last week, and it's good because you can give feedback and say, look, these are things we'd really like to build out. One of these at the moment that we're talking to them about is getting towards real-time visibility of fees, because it'd be great to have a link that clients can kind of see that. The traditional narrative is, well, what if there's errors in the narratives that we've typed? And I think the reality is, 9 times in 10 at least, clients would rather just have a handle on where you are. So there's that experience we've had using smaller technology providers. You can kind of put your fingerprints on it. We use HiQ, which is really good as a way to build an internal intranet, to have your know-how. We run our own internal and client-facing know-how training sessions, much like you do, and that's a great piece of tech because you can have know-how templates, guides very easily accessible. There's bits of tech like Boomerang, which is a great plugin for Outlook, where you can kind of pause your inbox and boomerang emails into the future, so you can have a particular window of time where you may be doing fee emails or BD emails or technical things like that. I think are good. I mean, there's a lot on Office 365 that actually is really good. Like OneNote, I quite like. The to-do list is brilliant there. So I think there's a risk, thinking of your audience and people that maybe are setting up, there's a risk not to overcook the tech too early on, rather than getting up and running and actually in parallel absorbing more recommendations as you go.
Well, those are great. Thank you. I mean, I'm going to make a note of them. And actually, we might share them. If you're happy, we might kind of share links to those particular products, vendors, just, with this podcast, so that people can see. Obviously, you accept no liability, and neither do we, but they're ones where you've had good experiences. So it's always just great to share that kind of intel between founders. Thank you. So coming back to your business and your vision and your strategy, I mean, so is there a big vision? Is there a big vision for where you want the firm to be in, say, 5 years? And I guess allied to that is, what does success look like for you personally and for you as a firm?
Well, I think it has to start with success, and success is very genuinely not just about making money. It's part of why we all go to work, of course, but success is about looking around and waking up on a Monday and really genuinely looking forward to the job, which hand on heart, I do. It's a very common cliche in law, but actually working with people that you absolutely love working with is massive. I think for us, I'm sure it's the same at CM Murray, working with people that share your culture, share your vision, and that you learn stuff from, and that challenge you. That's one of, by far, the biggest motivators, and that's most certainly what success, I hope, always looks like. I think that plugs into a personal development journey, which most lawyers, there was a piece in The Lawyer about this the other week, most lawyers that are really enjoying what they do are feeling like they're developing and they're growing as people. And actually we spend, or rather invest, a huge amount of money in coaching with a brilliant long-standing coach, Mark Smith, and he's been great at coaching the whole of the senior leadership team and quite a number of other people across the firm. And that's really definitely a huge part of our success, both in achieving it, but both also because at certain points you look back in the mirror at yourself a year ago and you see how you've changed, and that's most certainly one of the elements of what success will look like. I think in terms of other elements, I think there's a sense of autonomy, in being involved in small businesses, and there's a sense of dynamism, and it's very, very dynamic. And I would imagine it would be the same for you. The idea that next year is going to be totally different from this, well, maybe not totally different, but it's different. That's quite fulfilling, actually, rather than it being, it's never more of the same, put it that way. I think rolling out new ways of doing things, fixed fee products, that virtual general counsel product we've got for something that's quite interesting and fun. I think, failure, or putting it differently, things not going according to plan, that's a huge part of success and of learning. In terms of what it looks like in more quantitative terms, I think we're about 5 million turnover now. Our plan is to kind of hit 10 by 2025. Again, that's not driven by purely making money. That's one of the things that's important with that, is it talks to an economy of scale. And as a small law firm, I think we've talked about it with your journey, and most certainly mine. There's more. You're a little bit more of a milk top bottle floating on the waves. When you're smaller, you just have one thing that knocks you, and you're suddenly underwater. And so, our thinking is, if with a little bit more growth, there's more to share in a very transparent way internally in terms of profitability. But it just means the firm's got a little bit more in terms of resources to catch its breath, think strategically, and plan for the midterm.
Yeah, there's definitely that resilience as well that you get from scale, and from more diversification as well. I've talked, I think, boringly at length in other podcasts about discovering 10 years in from a business course that I did that we were what's known as a gazelle business, where you go through this cycle of kind of going up in sort of leaps. So you'll have a good year, an amazing year, an intergalactic year, and then you'll have a horrible year. and then it's just repeat that cycle. And that's apparently a thumbnail sketch of what a gazelle business is. And that's what we were doing. And it was because we weren't being brave enough in terms of investing and growing and infrastructure and resilience. And until you do that, until you're just bolder and a little bit more grown up in your approach to being a founder than perhaps I was being for a long time, or maybe even now. You're going to keep going through those cycles, and it's the highs. The highs are the highs are fabulous. I mean, when you're a founder, as opposed to being a really successful partner in a much bigger firm, of which we both have loads of those people. And sometimes I look at them from afar and go, oh my God, you have such an amazing life. You're surrounded by, you do amazing work. You're surrounded by this incredible support structure. You're just really thinking about the work, bringing it in and kind of looking after your team, and you get paid a huge vault of money. And I think, why do we keep doing this? Because sometimes it can feel really hard. And why we keep doing it is because sometimes it's utterly awesome, because it's just, and you can have long periods of years where doing what we do as founders can just be the most awesome and self-fulfilling and exhilarating experience. But also there are tough times as well. And I think there's a real resilience that you have to build on a human and organizational level, and also a scale, which brings us back to your point, a scale and an infrastructure that allows you to get through and to weather the more difficult times as well as the...
Yeah, I think you've put it brilliantly, Claire. And I think one of the things you're describing there, in terms of what success looks like, is a sense of it's awesome because you get to be yourself. There's a sense of authenticity about it. But I think the other half of that coin, to move beyond a gazelle business, which I think most new law firms would probably, you'd have to go through that phase, the kind of pirate phase, the gazelle phase. Success perhaps looks like a degree of consistency, boring as it sounds, actually being able to have a business plan, have a growth strategy, have an ability to kind of manage risk. Still have those brilliant years, hopefully, where you surprise yourself, but moderate it without losing the sense of fun and excitement. I think that probably is I think you've articulated it better than me. That's a great summary of what success must necessarily mean.
So how do you keep this obvious joy? So I wrote down here, it was going to be part of my little intro, saying that the firm and even its website reflects its founder, Alex McPherson, that they just burst with joy and enthusiasm and self-belief, which, it kind of from an outside viewer is very inspiring. And I just wonder, how do you maintain that sort of personally?
Well, I think you can't always, is probably the honest answer. You have periods where you have to listen to your body as you get a bit older and get a bit of sleep and try and get a breather. Except if things aren't going to plan on a particular day, you need to kind of switch off. That's a challenge. I'm not great at switching off. I'm really not. I think from probably one of those big low points, end of 2015, where it was great, in a business sense, but was hard physically and emotionally, was quite a low point. I think you maintain it by starting to think about mental and physical health. So I've never been any good at sport. I had teams fighting over who was left with me when I was at school. It was that level of ability or lack thereof. And I started to kind of see a PT once a week in 2015, and have, with coaching, it's been a really good mirror of consistency to oneself. Started to build that up to trying to have an activity once a day, even if it's as simple as a bit of tennis or walking the dog or whatever. That's massive. And I think that's been really important to do that. I think a bit of meditation and yoga and things like that are very good to keep an eye on what's going on inside as well, and make sure you're okay when you need that resilience. I think those things are incredibly important. I think beyond that, especially for men in particular, statistically, there's a really worrying suicide rate, around the age of 40, where women very generally are better at talking about these things. Guys are getting better, I think, but actually establishing a culture generally where people can talk about having not such good days is really important to maintaining that sense of fun, drive, and growth. And we had a great experience at our offsite last year where someone wanted to tell the story of a personal breakdown and going into the Priory, and he told it with such honesty at our offsite in a workshop that led on to us having a mental health officer in the business who is trained in basic mental health. She's not pretending to be a psychologist or a psychiatrist. She's there in confidence, on very much on a paid basis, to be there for people and to kind of look after them and refer them on. That's been really important, because that's led to, as you described, Claire, the shop window being that sense of fun and dry, and that's very much us. But at the same time, having a very clear culture where it's okay not to be okay, and have places to talk about that. So we have a buddying system as well. And I think, as many firms do, and I think in an environment where people have been locked up in their homes, there's a lot of stuff that people want to talk about. So you kind of have to acknowledge that.
Yes, I love that. Very sort of joined up, and also very much in line with the guidance that the SRA has actually recently issued on, well-being, supporting well-being within firms, and speak up culture and supporting mental health, etc. So it sounds like you're well ahead, sort of culturally, in terms of driving and supporting and talking about those kind of issues. So I've mentioned already, and I think I try and talk about them to the team as well, about how often I make mistakes. I try and avoid it, hopefully not on client matters. You really, we've got a pretty robust risk framework to minimize that. But just as a human being and as a fellow colleague, you make mistakes. And as a founder and a business driver, you make mistakes, and I think we all have to accept that we will fail at things. But hopefully most of the time we'll be good enough. But where you do fail or you make mistakes, that you embrace them and you learn from them, because actually you're a much more valuable leader as a result. I sometimes think, people get demoted or exited for, doing something significant, but they might have just lost a leader who's actually a better person and a better human being because they've learned from a mistake. They've not been perfect. Anyway, I just wondered, are there any particular failures or mistakes that you've particularly gone through and embraced and learned from that you're happy to share?
Yeah, of course. I think early on I was a lot more, I don't think I had a brilliant skill set, because I think as a lawyer, you get taught to draft, you get taught to be in the detail, you get taught a little bit about client management. And actually, I was very lucky. Hogan Lovells had a bit of an MBA program, kind of stripped down MBA, where you could do sessions once a month. But still, there was a real lack of leadership and business, and certainly numerical skills. So I think there was a failure in terms of trying to do everything and pretend to be good at everything. Things like numbers aren't my forte, and so learning, rather than to get cross and drive through a brick wall, learning to build a team where you work together and you listen, I think is hugely important. It's a very common failure. One of my earliest ones was not listening, and I think there were one or two situations where getting angry isn't a great response. It doesn't get you where you need to go, and I certainly did that in a meeting very early on with some colleagues, and got quite cross and quite defensive. And actually, I would hope now, partly by doing so much coaching, being coached for so many years, learn to ask open questions, think about it, pause the meeting, take ownership with a bit more gravitas, and circle back once you've had a chance to reflect. I think it's really important. I think one tip that someone told me, if you're having a tricky conversation, you don't have to do it facing each other over a table. You could do it whilst having a walk on the phone. There are less combative ways you can approach tricky conversations. I think other areas where I certainly failed was taking a lot of stuff very personally. We had to make a tricky decision. If it was having to part company with somebody on purely objective grounds, you still bring it home with you hugely. Of course you do. But actually, I think what I've started to do a bit more now is, if you're having a tricky fee conversation, or a client wants to talk to you about an issue, regarding it almost as a rite of passage, an opportunity to learn, and something that will come up running a law firm. It's almost like walking around the block. You'll see the same old things the more times you go round. And that's very different to the first time you experience these things. Somebody leaving, somebody threatening, you take it a bit less personally. And I think that was certainly a big failure of mine, was to not listen, be very, very defensive, and effectively draw a line there, rather than perhaps having a reflect and coming back for a part two on whatever that issue might be.
Let's be honest, those are really understandable issues. Let's not call them mistakes or failures, but issues, because if you're the founder of the firm, and this is your extra child, you've kind of grown this and built it, and so you can feel very protective and defensive, and so I think those are very honest and understandable emotions and reactions, and to have taken them and learned from them in a very stoical way through coaching and development is wonderful.
Oh, thank you, Claire. I appreciate that.
So just sort of bringing it back to our friends who might be listening to this, either contemplating setting up a firm, or maybe in that first year or two of setting up a firm, what tips and guidance would you give them just to help them through, to sort of inspire and motivate and just help them understand that whatever they might be going through, it will pass?
Yeah, so I think that's a really good question. It comes almost full circle to the start in terms of have that plan. That's something you can control. There's some sort of a business plan for year one, but be really kind to yourself when it goes wildly off piste, which it will, for better and for worse. Be kind to yourself. It's at the end of the day, it's a small business in its first year of trading, and and exactly as you said, it will pass. I think making notes is a really important thing to do. Having you see this a lot with successful entrepreneurs. They're very good at making notes, having a notebook. I mean, I use OneNote, as I mentioned, on Office 365, which I love, works for me, but it's a very personal thing. I think making notes of how you're doing, where you are on your journey is hugely helpful, because you might find you're exhausted by March and things seem to be going all over the place, but by August, actually, that's very helpful to reflect on where you were then and where you are now. I think that's a great tip that someone shared with me. I think lean into it being a tough year, and just because it's a tough start doesn't mean it's always going to be like that. I think the other tip is definitely, with me not being a particularly big numbers person, I break it down into quarters, and I always have, and I work on a calendar basis. I just find that easier, and actually that's a really helpful way to break up your year. You can kind of have a reward for yourself when you get to the end of that quarter, a breather. You can have whatever the metrics are, not just necessarily financial. Once you exceed them, that's quite a nice way to manage your year, when you start thinking January, February, March, rather than it just being this never-ending 12-month period. Certainly from our story, there's nothing wrong with joint venturing and having partners along the way. And I think lawyers, very often, there's an assumption sometimes we need to close doors, but actually the support we've had from other law firms, people like yourself, Claire, with the most amazing journey, who are there to support, to talk to. We're not really competitors. We're more all in a very exciting point in law of moving together on the crest of a wave. And similarly, firms like Hogan's, where I was, are incredibly good friends, where we're able to now send bits to them and vice versa. So I think there's certainly, we're starting up, it's much more, maybe community is a bit of an overused word, but there is this sense of people out there who'll get your back, and there is this real karma, and that's massive. And I think the final thing would be, in that vein, you're going to be taking on a lot of risk. You're going to be spending a lot of capital, and you're going to experience quite a paradigm shift. And having mentors, whether they're clients, experienced lawyers, friends, asking for their advice, it's surprising how kind people are if you ask them for their opinion, their advice. That's massive for a first year. That's
wonderful, absolutely wonderful. That kind of a bit of self-compassion, recognizing that people that might be perceived as competitors are actually some of your greatest allies. We love a strategic alliance and a collaboration. They've been hugely successful, both on a business and a personal level. So I completely endorse what you're saying. And thanks so much. This has been wonderful.
Thank you.
Really inspiring and fun as well. And it's very infectious. So so thank you for that.
Well, thank you.
So I hope if you've stayed with us to the end, that you have enjoyed this podcast. Alex's details and that of his firm will be at the end of this. And please do get in contact with Alex and his colleagues. If you're interested in what they're doing, check out their website. It really is, it's very inspiring. It's very focused on startups and entrepreneurs and sort of tech sector and related sort of sectors. So please do check them out. Get in touch with Alex if that's of interest. If you've enjoyed this, then, as they say, please like and subscribe, forward to your friends, etc. But most of all, thank you so much for staying with us and sharing this conversation. And I hope you've enjoyed it as much as I have. Thank you. Take care. Bye. And thanks again, Alex.
Thank you. Thanks, Claire.